John, the coordinators today. Let's dive into some stuff. I want to start with Reich today. Did you get the sense that Reich and Pederson may not have conversation before they do these things?
That's a good question. I doubt they have conversations. I think Doug and Frank are in the same boat.
So essentially, Reich is sitting on the airplane next to Blunt, and Peterson's not talking to either one of them.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that. I just don't think they take it as seriously, and you know, they're more concerned about the New York Giants than about us, which is understandable. And I think they're both in a difficult position when it comes to the run-pass thing, because they both always pay lip service to it during the week, and then when the game comes around, they fall back to the pass. And I wrote about that on 973ESPN.com. It's got to do with personnel. They're not confident in their running backs, but neither is going to sit up there at the podium and you know, insult their players. They're not going to do that, nor should they. But actions always speak louder than words, and their actions are they don't trust their running backs. I don't necessarily disagree with them either. Okay. I think I understand why they don't trust them.
So this is a Howie problem? Are the two, is the coordinator and the head coach pointing the finger at Howie by not running the ball?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I don't think they're trying to purposely say, you know, Howie made a mistake by not getting us this. But in the Eagles situation, which is basically the coaching staff has handed the players by the de facto general manager and Joe Douglas, his assistant. I mean, from that point forward, they do what they feel is best to win games. And obviously, if you look at this team, I talked about it before the season. Throughout the offseason, we always talk about what's the biggest weakness, and we always said cornerback, until they got Ronald Darby, and they made some other moves, and then it became running back. Right before, I said this is the issue. This is the biggest problem on this team, and it's unfolding that way.
Yeah, it just seems that, like, I remember last year at wideout, we kind of talked about this. You'd go around, and Tyreek Hill, for example, and you know, there was a lot of guys who were small, fast guys. The teams were just figuring out ways to get them the ball. I remember having that conversation right around the time when Treggs came up. It seems that a lot of teams find running backs. You know what I mean? They just find a guy that you never heard of, and
Seattle just found another one.
No, but Seattle found a guy before that. Rawls was a guy nobody heard about, and then Rawls came in for about a 10-game stretch, and he was outstanding. And then he got hurt, and then they find another guy. But it just seems that finding a running back should not be this difficult, and they haven't been able to find one since McCoy really left.
Yeah, and you look at, hey, I believe they wanted Christian McCaffrey. I believe they wanted Dalvin Cook. They weren't able to get either. And at that point, you tend to look at what they did by drafting Donnell Pumphrey. You look in between Sidney Jones and Donnell Pumphrey, you kind of look at the running backs that went off the board, and you start shaking your head. One of them being Kareem Hunt, who's had such a spectacular start. But there's other guys. There's James Conner in Pittsburgh this prime, and with the Redskins. All of these guys could be far more effective than what the Eagles have right now. And they chose the 170-pound scat back who we all said at the time just doesn't look like an NFL player.
Well, they also chose a guy last year in Smallwood. They drafted him. I mean, so they essentially they're trying to tell us that they've struck out 2 years in a row in drafting backs?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not willing to pull the plug on Smallwood just yet, because I think he's a guy. His issues, I think, are a little bit different in the fact that if you did give him the ball 20 times on a particular game, I think he would be somewhat effective running the football. His issues have to do with pass protection and getting the quarterback killed in blitz pickups. And obviously the face of this franchise and the diamond in the middle of everything is Carson Wentz. And the last thing they want to do is put a running back on the field that can't pass protect. So I think that's more Smallwood's issue. it's difficult. It's difficult to find somebody, and the one guy who can do it all is Darren Sproles, but he's old and he's 5'6", so it's a problem.
John, you may not be willing to pull the plug on Smallwood, but are the Eagles willing to do that, or have they already? Did we see a hint of that based on the Chiefs game and how they used everybody?
No, I think at some point you're going to see him get a game where he's the guy. I think they may have pulled the plug. We'll see better this week, obviously. And this is a big week, a bad week to try to get the running game going, because the New York Giants are not only desperate, but obviously the defense is the strength of their team, and you got Snacks Harrison right in the middle. So this is not a team you want to get the running game going with. And if LeGarrette Blount is barely in the game plan again, I think that's a clear indication they have pulled the plug on him. I think at some point Wendell's going to get those 15 carries in a particular game and get an opportunity. So I don't think they've given up on him completely just yet. And I think at some point even Corey Clement might get that opportunity, because Darren Sproles just can't do this week in and week out. We've talked about it numerous times in the past. I thought, dating back, you guys might remember, I thought they might do this because this might be his last year. So there's no reason to save him as you thought in the past. You might as well sort of run all the tread off the tire you could possibly do. But ultimately, I don't think he can hold up through 16 games, and somebody's got to run the football.
And, John, you remember Smallwood had a couple of games last year where they allowed him to be the guy, and he showed that he could do it. Pittsburgh, I'm thinking of. The Atlanta game, I'm thinking of. So does it really boil down to that opportunity, that they haven't given him enough of an opportunity?
Yeah, from a running standpoint, I think it does with him. I think he'll be fine, as I said. When he gets that opportunity, if he's able to touch the football even 12, 13 times, somewhere in that range, I think he'll be fine. I think it's the other issues. And, you start to talk about ancillary things from that standpoint, and the fact that you also have a tight end who doesn't block well. And you don't have a fullback on this roster. So other avenues where you could use other players to mask the fact that you don't have a very good pass protector in the backfield, well, the Eagles can't do that either. So it becomes a point where, okay, Darren Sproles is the one guy who can do it. Let's play him, and I think that's where the Eagles are.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles, of course, getting ready for the Giants. I don't know that if you watched that game last night, you would feel like the Giants would be, in the mix for the division or a playoff team. They did win 11 games last year. But if you're Philadelphia, do you like the fact that this team's 0-2, traveled on the road, or do you feel like this is a bad spot to face New York after watching last night?
Well, I think the Eagles' defense is certainly licking their chops. I mean, I think they're thrilled to face this offensive line, and they should be, as that front is going to absolutely destroy that offensive line. I don't see any way around it from the Giants' standpoint. So I think it becomes an issue with the offense. The Giants' defense is still very good, and they played very well last night for the most part. I just mentioned Harrison up front. Janoris Jenkins wasn't able to play in last night's game. We'll see how that shakes out. But they're very good defensively. In this offense, and this running game specifically, it's probably a bad week for them. So I think it depends how you frame it. But to play a home game against this team with that offense, this is the game. We talked about it last week. You can lose to Kansas City on the road out of conference. It's not that big of a deal. But if you lose this game, that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's a point we brought up on the Countdown to Kickoff, which you can catch, John, every Eagles game day. 3 hours before every Eagles game day, John and Joe will have the Countdown to Kickoff show. And we were talking about that on the Countdown to Kickoff about we'll trade a loss against Kansas City to get the game against New York. And, I certainly agree with that. Right now, you got to be the number one matchup. When I came on with you guys and do the 5 keys to the game, number one's got to be the D-line against the O-line. That's an absolute check mark, Philadelphia.
Yeah, I mean, you saw it last night. The Lions are pretty good up front, but they're not the Eagles. Ziggy Ansah is a really good edge rusher, but they don't have the complements the Eagles do up and down the line. And it's just, I talk about Brandon Graham all the time. Again, his motor never stops. He's one of the best defensive ends in football. It's time to just admit that and move on from the fact that he had a slow start to his career. Then you talk about the domination of Fletcher Cox and Tim Jernigan inside. Vinny Curry's obviously hot and cold. But it's a top 5 front, and it's played like a top 5 front. And if I'm Ben McAdoo, you're going to go into practice this week on Wednesday, and you're professionals, and you're going to try to prepare. But I don't know how you block those guys up front with what he brings to the table.
The Eagles are in a similar spot. You wrote about Seumalo at 97.3ESPN.com. We talked a lot about him yesterday, but
he didn't just write about him. He brought in, you are the weakest link.
Yeah,
goodbye.
You wrote today that he is the weakest link on the team, and you wonder, how long and how stubborn they're going to be with that spot, because it's evident now with the way the Giants played last night. You beat Washington. You're in position to win this division.
Yeah, they are. It is very evident. As I predicted, the Giants and the Cowboys were coming back to the pack, and that's how it's shaping, and that's how it's unfolding. And the Eagles have every opportunity to win this division. There's no question about it. And I don't know how long you can continue to go with Isaac Seumalo the way he's playing. They're going to do it one more week. They've made that clear. Doug Pederson and Frank Reich both stuck behind him. But I think if you see one more game like he's had in the first 2, I think that's it. Especially when you have what they have behind him, and the fact that you have Stefan Wisniewski, Chance Warmack, who have both started a lot of games. So when you talk about lineup changes, I think a lot of fans don't recognize the first thing you have to do is have a backup that could potentially handle the job. That's usually not the case around the league and at different positions. In this particular case, hey, there's no doubt Wisniewski is a better player than Isaac Seumalo right now, today. The issue is the Eagles believe Seumalo has a very high ceiling. The last thing you want to do is affect his him from a mental standpoint and lose him that way. And it's a tough, it's a tightrope. It really is, as far as how you handle it. And right now they're sticking with him. But if he continues to play the way he has and there's no improvement, at some point, when you have somebody like Wisniewski who can do the job and can do the job, you have to make that change.
And not only that, let me ask you your opinion, because Barrett was on with us yesterday, and he believes Warmack is the best option of the 3. It seems that they have 2 better options.
Yeah, and he's right. They probably do at this stage. I haven't seen. Obviously, Chance has the big has the pedigree as a former top 10 pick, and he also was at Alabama with Jeff Stoutland, the offensive line coach. So you have that familiarity. But I think that's the reason he's on this team. Really, I don't think he played that well in the preseason. I don't think he was that good in practice. He was a little bit slow off the ball. So I don't necessarily agree with that. I think Wiz is the better option, at least in the short term. But the second part to that, the unintended consequence of that is he's also your backup at all 3 spots on game day. So if he's a starter, well, then he's not that backup.
Well, hold on.
So couldn't
essentially Seumalo, he plays center. Couldn't he essentially be the backup?
Yeah, he would be. Yeah, he would fit into the Wisniewski role. But we already kind of know he can't play. And if you, as I mentioned before, from the perspective of his psyche, if you bench him and then tell him, well, you're going to be the interior backup, and then something happens and he's got to go out there and play, you still have the fractured psyche. So that's kind of the stuff that, from a sports perspective as a whole, that's the kind of stuff Phil Jackson was great at, the mental aspect of it, and managing personalities and egos and massaging people. And that's it's difficult. It's not as easy as it seems because these aren't robots. He's not going to go right in there and say, I'm going to accept that role and excel at it.
John, is it fair to make the argument that Seumalo was the fourth best left guard they had when they traded Alan Barber? I mean, he's not a guy that...
I think it's evident he's the fourth best left guard they had, which is kind of amazing, as you point out. I think their biggest mistake was handing him the job and not making it a competition.
That is the biggest problem I had, was that was not a competition. They gave this guy the job, and that's what ticks me off is he didn't win it, and that's why I don't have a problem yanking his ass.
No, you're right. And that's why Alan got upset because, look, everybody knows Alan Barber was a better player, including Alan Barber and probably Isaac Seumalo, and certainly the rest of that offensive line who played so well with Alan. But the Eagles aren't the only team that does that. When you have a premium pick, and Isaac was, that premium picks are first through third round, every organization wants those guys to succeed. That's just the way this league is. And they're going to be given the benefit of the doubt time and time again. And that's what the Eagles did here. They wanted him to be a starter. They didn't make it a competition. And Pete's right. He is the fourth best left guard they had. And they gave him the job.
And by the way, Alan Barber started for the Broncos and handled that Cowboys defense just fine, it looked like, on Sunday.
Yeah, he's been rotating with Max Garcia. But remember, he's also new there. So I think ultimately he'll seize the job and play all the time. But from the Eagles' standpoint, he's a 33-year-old guy. It was the last year of his contract. They knew this was going to be his last year in Philadelphia if he stayed. And they're working toward the future as well as trying to win, trying to serve two masters, which every team does. They're not the only one. And so there was more to it than just this guy's better than this guy. And there always is with these types of issues. But from a player standpoint, if you're Jason Peters, if you're Jason Kelsey, all you're worried about is who's the best player in between you. And those guys know it would have been Alan Barber. And that, by the way, includes Wisniewski and Warmack.
Hey, John, Mike mentioned that just having Doug give up the play calling might not be enough of a tweak to help the team succeed. Do you agree with that? Because I know that Doug maybe delegating or getting some stuff off his plate is something that you've said in the past would help the team.
No, yeah, I agree with that with every NFL coach. So I'm not changing that with Doug. I don't think you saw what Ben McAdoo last night. Going for it, 17-7 game, going for it on 4th and 2, which is a bad decision. And then on top of it, Eli Manning gets a delay of game penalty. And he threw his quarterback under the bus after the game. Well, I got news for you. If you're so hell-bent on running a 4th and 2 play, coaches can call timeouts from the sideline now. He could have called timeout and saved his quarterback. But you know what? He wasn't paying attention because he's being bogged down by the play call and thinking about other things.
He's got a really big play sheet there, too.
And it happens with every coach in this league that calls plays, whether it's offensive or defense. They have trouble with time management, and they have trouble because they can't focus on the whole game because they're bogged down with the minutia of running an offense or a defense.
Did Reich call plays? Did Reich call plays? I know DeFilippo called plays in Cleveland. Did Reich call plays?
No, he didn't, which is one of the issues of people in saying. But I think, somebody's got to – when people criticize people that have never called plays, and that's what people kind of criticize Doug for. He did it for a very short time under Andy Reid in Kansas City. I always compare it to being the president. I mean, nobody has experience to be the president of the United States. So whenever you hear people playing this guy, and that's not, believe me, I don't want to bring Donald Trump into anything. I'm talking about anybody who's ever run for president. People always throw that at them. Well, there's no experience for that. There's no experience for play calling. You don't know if you're good at it until you do it. You got to do it to try it.
Here's the question that needs to be phrased to Doug then. Doug, Bill Belichick doesn't find it necessary to call plays. I think he's a pretty good coach. Why do you deem it to be necessary to call plays?
Well,
they'll escort you out of the press room, but
we'll all stand and give you a standing ovation back here on this end.
Because I've been writing about CEO coaches for probably a decade or more. I think that's the best way to do it. That's the way Belichick does it. That's the way Pete Carroll does it. Arguably the top two coaches in the NFL. Now, that said, the majority of coaches aren't CEO coaches. And I talked to Tom Coughlin about this, and I asked him because it makes no sense to me. And he explained that you're never going to have a CEO coach as a first-year coach, because what you have to do is you have to put your imprint on the organization. You have to set the tone. You have to get people you trust. You have to get everybody on the same page. So those CEO-type coaches, Belichick didn't start that way. Carroll didn't start that way. They get that way later in their career because they figure it out. You know what? I'm more effective if I can have my imprint on every part of this team, not just one aspect on game day. But it's only veteran guys, first-year coaches, and now Doug's in the second year. Point to a CEO coach other than John Harbaugh. And John Harbaugh is a CEO coach because he was a special teams guy.
By the way,
he doesn't know.
This tweet from Ben McAdoo today for Eagles fans. Rejoice, Eric Flowers will be the left tackle on Sunday.
Well, I think Vinny Curry and Derek Barnett are rejoicing at that news.
He's John McMullen.
And I think ultimately you'll probably see Brandon Graham probably lined up there as well because they'd like to take advantage of that as well.
Absolutely. Ben McAdoo, yes. Eric Flowers will absolutely be at left tackle. Asked if he will retain play calling. Quote, we'll evaluate things each and every day. So it could be a new play caller possibly in New York. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. John McMullen's NFL News and Notes. Don't forget to check him out at JF McMullen for all his national columns at FanRag Sports NFL and his Eagles coverage at 97.3 ESPN.com. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.
Thank you, John. John McMullen's appearance on the show brought to you by Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit Gino Pinto on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton, online at GinoPinto.com. Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years.